I wanted to just back up briefly before we launch into Genesis chapter 12 and just say that we had basically gone through the flood and the dispersion after the flood and the Tower of Babel, and then we were introduced to Abraham. And now we are going to look at the life of Abraham as it begins his calling out of the land of Babylon and his journeys to the Promised Land. And there's so much stuff here that I doubt very much that I could do it justice. But hopefully with your help, and your own wisdom and insight and the help of the Spirit of God, that we'll be able to see some things in there for us that will teach us and help us. Now, the first thing that I want to do is we'll just read this section, and then I will kind of slow down and back up a little bit and talk about some stuff. But Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 20 says this. And Jehovah spoke to Abraham and said, "Go to yourself out of your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to a land which I will show you. And I shall make you a great nation, and bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram left as Jehovah had commanded him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the souls whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they came to the land of Canaan. And Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the plain of Moreh. Yours might say the oak or the terebinth of Moreh. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. And Jehovah appeared to Abram and said, "To your seed I give this land." And he built there a slaughter place, or an altar, to Jehovah, who had appeared to him. And from there he moved to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there another slaughter place, an altar to Jehovah, and called on the name of Jehovah. And Abram set out, continuing toward the south. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Mitzrayim, or Egypt, to dwell there, because the famine was severe in the land. And it came to be, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Behold, I know that you are a beautiful woman to look at. And it shall be, when the Egyptians see you, that they shall say, 'This is his wife,' and they shall kill me, but let you live. Please say, 'You are my sister,' so that it shall be well with me for your sake, and my life be spared because of you." And it came to be, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and cattle and male donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But Jehovah plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not inform me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? And so I was going to take her for my wife. Behold, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. A most fascinating set of circumstances here that I'm like I said, this is tremendously deep, and there's so much spiritual wisdom here that we're just going to try to scratch the surface here. I want to first draw your attention to the very opening, not the very opening words, but really close to the opening words of this passage, where it says lek lakah in Hebrew. And that is roughly translated as, for example, what does yours say here? Instead, mine says go to yourself. Keith, what does yours say?
Where are we at?
Right at the very beginning, when he said to Abram, what did he say exactly to Abram right at the beginning?
Get thee out of thy country.
Get thee out of thy country. Okay, Mike, what does yours say?
Go for yourself from your...
Go for yourself. Yeah, it's a interesting Hebrew phrase, and you can see that it's used in a lot of different places, and it has most often in English just says go. You know, they just translate it as go, but in the Hebrew it is actually literally translated as go to yourself, which is a rather odd way of phrasing that, but I think that there's spiritual instruction there for us, because go to yourself seems to be an implication of a spiritual journey that Abraham is supposed to embark upon, and that he is actually, it's almost like God is saying, go, start moving in the direction of what I want you to become. Start moving in the direction. It's almost like a kind of destiny kind of thing. It's like a prophecy and like a destiny kind of thing. I have destined you to become something great, and I want you to take the first steps on this journey, and therefore he says, go to yourself. Head in the direction of what you are bound to be. And I think that what we can learn from this is that when we hear the call of God, either as a new believer, or as a firm believer who is hearing God, for whatever, through the scriptures or whatever, that we really feel that God is speaking to us and giving us instruction, giving us something that we need to pay attention to, that we really have to have faith that what God is calling us to is much greater than what he's calling us from. That as we go to ourselves, we are fulfilling this sense of destiny that we have. And frankly, I think that I know it sounds a little bit hokey, but the destiny that we have as children of God, as he calls us out of wherever we're from, and wherever our situation is, and is calling us to himself. Abraham is literally being called to a place here, but you can very easily spiritually allegorize this and say he's being called out of one position in life and being called to another, and that God has, obviously, as we get into these pronouncement of tremendous blessings upon him in verse 2, he's got a great plan for this man. And I think that he has a great plan for each of us that is much more glorious than we're even aware of. But this hope that we have in his calling, I mean, frankly, what keeps you grounded more than anything is hope. I mean, Paul talks about the hope that is in us. Frankly, social psychologists and psychologists have done, extensive testing and said that, a man can live without anything. He can live without water for 2 or 3 days, and he can live without food for 2 or 3 weeks, and he can live without air for up to 2 minutes, but he can't live without hope, period. And that hope that we have for what God has promised to us is what keeps us moving along. And it would be real easy to lose hope, if you get to looking around about you and figure, seeing all the problems and the world's difficulties and getting kind of thinking about those things too much, dwelling on them. Then that's when we go to the Psalms. That's when we go to the Proverbs. That's when we turn to the Scriptures, and we need to remind ourselves, what has God called us to? Because that will give us the strength to move forward when it seems really challenging to do that, to move one step at a time, or take those steps forward. So I think that these opening verses of Lech Lecha, go to yourself, has some prophetic significance, which is to say, move in the direction of the destiny that I have called you to. Does anyone have any more insight or any commentary on that? Keith, anything?
I was just looking up the words to.
Okay.
The BDB also says cause to walk,
Yeah.
right? And so this, I think we see this kind of foreshadowing of the Exodus here. in this chapter.
Yeah, there's some, and that's another question that I have here in a couple of minutes, is the relation to this episode to the Exodus. There's a lot of connections there. I think this is a prophetic foreshadowing. This is a prophetic picture. That the similarities to this story and the Exodus are pretty striking. And so we'll definitely look at that, absolutely. I want to briefly, well, probably not briefly, but I want to discuss with you guys you realize, of course, that starting in verse 2, this is the gospel. When Paul says, or I believe it was the book of Hebrews, maybe also says it, the gospel was preached to Abraham. This is it. This is the gospel. This is the gospel of the kingdom. That's why when we started this series, I put the gospel of the kingdom from the beginning. Because we saw the gospel preached in a really obscure kind of way when it talked about the curse, and the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent and the crushing the head and the wounding of the heel. We saw a little bit of shadowy, obscure prophetic utterances regarding the Messiah and the redemption of mankind, but it was dark and it was mysterious and it wasn't well elucidated. Now we know about it because we've studied the scriptures for a long time and people have noted that. But I think a lot of people can really miss the fact that this thing right here that is spoken to Abraham is that's the whole thing. It's not terribly fully elucidated like Paul or Yeshua would do in the Greek scriptures, but here is the actual gospel of the kingdom preached in a more full sense for the first time in the Torah. There are shadowy pictures like Noah. You can talk about the rescue of the end times and establishing the kingdom. There's some foreshadowing there for sure. There's lots of little pictures and foreshadows, but this is pretty explicit. And I wanted us to examine the progression of what exactly did God say to him? What are these promises? What do they mean? So that we can maybe get a better and more full understanding of the gospel of the kingdom from this section, because I think it's all right here in a nutshell. Let's start with not a terribly simple question, but does it strike you, before we get to that his direct instructions are, go, however you want to phrase that, go out of your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house. Does that strike anyone else as being just slightly backwards? That the progression seems backwards? I mean, think about this. If God said to him, I want you to leave that area where you are and come to the land that I'm showing you, wouldn't he first leave his father's house, leave his relatives, and leave his land? That would be the progression of how you would do it. So why did God say, leave the land, leave your relatives, leave your father's house? It seems backwards. It doesn't follow the logical progression of how this would normally take place in a physical, traditional sense. You have any ideas about why that might be?
I think any married couple knows that you can physically leave the house of your parents, but you don't necessarily leave the mentality of that family structure.
That's a good point. Sometimes that's difficult. Yes, it is.
Or God just told me he did exactly what he wanted him to do. He just went and didn't ask questions.
Yeah, that is a key point that we would definitely want to do well to focus on, is that we don't have anything from Abram saying, what now? Where am I going? He didn't seem to ask any questions or have any concerns. It's like, yes sir, I'm going. Gracie?
He also didn't leave all his family.
No, he
He
didn't.
took his nephew.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So he says, from your relatives, from your father's house, leave your land, leave your relatives, and go from your father's house. Now, I think that perhaps this progression is shown because it's basically telling us about how much test of his faith it's going to take to leave each one of these. Is it easier to leave the land where you were raised? Let's say that you were born in Arizona and you want to move to California, for example, but your family's in California. Is it harder to move your land or harder to move away from family? Or let's say you were born in Arizona and raised in Arizona and all of your family's in Arizona and you're going to Texas and you don't know anybody there. So
it would be harder.
moving a land is less painful than leaving your relatives.
Yeah.
And then leaving your close relatives, your mother and father, that's even more challenging. So I think that this is presented to us in the order of difficulty. That leaving the land is the easiest thing to do. Leaving your relatives is harder. Leaving your father's house is even harder. I think that this is portrayed to us in a case of, we're going to take steps to go in the right direction. We're going to start with the easy stuff. I mean, he does it all at once. It's not like he's seeing this as steps, but I think it's not for no reason that this was portrayed to us in these steps. He could have not given any of those instructions. He just said, hey, go to this land that I'm showing you. Didn't need to say leave your land, leave your relatives, leave your father's house. It seems rather specific when he could have easily just said, I want you to leave everything and go to this place. But it's strangely specific. And I think it's for a good reason, that we need to realize that we can learn from this perhaps that when God is asking us to follow him, that we have to leave everything behind. And I think that, we kind of get this instruction from Yeshua himself in the Greek scriptures when he says, anyone who wants to follow me must leave father and mother. Whoever loves father and mother, brother and sister, more than me is not worthy of following me. And so I think that he's kind of talking about some of the similar stuff, that we need to be very willing to do that. Gracie?
It's called common cost.
Count the cost. That's a great way to do it. Yes, great way to state it. Count the cost. What is it going to cost you to do what God has asked you to do? And frankly, it's going to cost you everything. Now, why is that? Does that and some people will unfortunately misinterpret that, maybe even force upon themselves a lot of challenges and difficulties that they didn't need to face, because some people, when they say count the cost, might think, well, if God wants me to follow him, I'm going to have to give up everything that I really don't want to give up. Like, when I was younger, I used to think like this. If I was really to take God seriously and begin to follow him seriously and begin to really live the Christian life, I'm going to have to give up any fun. You know how that's been a real common refrain amongst people who were born and raised in the church, and thinking, well, if I take this seriously, I'm going to give up everything that's fun in life. I'm going to have to give up certain people that I know that I probably shouldn't hang out with. I'm going to have to give up certain activities that won't really fit with the Christian lifestyle. I'm going to have to give up certain things. And I have learned over the years, and probably not as well as I should, I'm certainly not done learning this lesson, that when you do live the Christian life and you do follow God in the path that he has for you, he really replaces your heart's desires from yours to his.
Yes.
And that you begin to conform, hopefully, to to what his desires are, and so that your desires in this life begin to more conform to his, and you don't want the things of the world as much as you used to. And so you really don't feel like you're losing out on something. You know, I heard somebody say once that, you know, most sin can be traced back to the feeling of I'm missing out on something. That most sin that you would commit is because you feel like you're missing out on something.
I was going to say, you know, I mean, it says that he gives you the desires of your heart. So, you know, when you become a believer, it's interesting how your life changes and you want certain things that you normally wouldn't before. You know, like it would have bothered you when your friends asked you to go clubbing and you're like, you know, then you would be like, oh, okay, you know, but then all of a sudden your heart starts changing. You're not sometimes even aware of it, and you're just going, this doesn't sound interesting to me. And you start finding that you have more desires doing different things, but I think that's part of, you know, him directing your path as well in doing those desires.
Absolutely. Your desires really need to change. They should change. You shouldn't certainly interpret that passage to say,
if you're doing the right
God's
thing,
going to give me all the desires of my heart.
No.
No, he's going to change my desires into his, and then he's going to be delighted to fulfill my desires. And that's why I think Yeshua kept saying, ask for anything in my name, then I'll do it. Because
but
if you...
he gives you these desires, and if you think of him that way, I think that it is so different. Than I'm not saying, oh Lord, please, I need $1 million. Could you just I mean, that, okay, really?
That'll just ruin you. He wouldn't want you to have that.
Is it selfish? Are you asking for what is your motivation here for asking?
Yeah,
for
checking
that
our
as well?
motivation is a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. Jerry?
I'm going to say, when you put this whole thing in context, 3,500 years ago, when you said goodbye to mom and dad, you probably didn't see them again.
Yeah,
Today, you say goodbye, you do the same thing. You can get on a plane, in 6 hours, you can be 5,000 miles from here.
Sure.
So even though you say goodbye today, that doesn't mean you're never going to see them again. And it's hard to
It's really hard to
relate
appreciate.
what we do today compared to what they did back then, and try to separate the two.
Yeah, and I think we can
Like
see.
your husband's over in Holland.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I think we can see in the scriptures too that Abraham did never see his family again.
I don't
He
think-
never went back to the land of Canaan. Angela?
If you look at that three-parter right there, where he tells to leave his land, and then his kindred, and then his father's house, and then you look at what he says right after that,
Yes.
it's also a bit of a three-parter. So he tells him to leave his land, but he tells him also in the promise that he's going to make him a great nation. Now, that's your
I'm giving you a new land.
side by side. You're going to leave your land. I'm going to make you a great nation. He says, you leave your kindred. In terms of relationships, I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And then in terms of leaving your father's house, he tells him, in you all families of the earth will be blessed. In other words, you're going to be the father of the seed, the blessing, Messiah, that's going to bless everyone. So you're going to leave these really temporal things like your land and your kindred and your father. But I'm going to give you these eternal things. I'm going to make you a great nation, bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and make you the father of the greatest thing ever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think when you look at the structure of that, Angela is absolutely correct, that everything that he is telling him to leave, he's going to replace.
Not just replace. It's 100-fold better
Yeah.
what he's going to do.
Absolutely.
And we have to remember that when he asks us to give up something, is
Sure.
that there might be, a promise on the other side of that, something better. Like Alan had this thing happen this week where they weren't going to use him for a certain job, and after, agonizing about it for a while, he finally came up with the idea, well, maybe there's something else that God has for me on that day that I'm supposed to do or be available for. I'm like, yes, that's the way you got to look at it.
That's a big point here, is that God does not tell him directly what exactly is going to happen. He paints with a broad brush. And he's going to fill in the details later. But when he first tells him, he says, go. He doesn't know where he's headed. to this land that I will show you, that's kind of nebulous. He said, go to this land that I will show you. He doesn't tell him exactly what's coming.
I was thinking about this week too. It's maybe kind of a little backwards thinking, but this is the beginning of the marriage covenant.
Yeah.
Right? And we often think of ourselves as the bride, but it talks about the husband will leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and as you pointed out before, in the Jewish tradition, he leaves and he goes and finds a place.
Right.
So you kind of have this picture of that a little bit here.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that when we are called by God, we must learn to leave everything behind and empty ourselves of all that we value most in our own wisdom and our own fleshly appetites. God is promising to bring us to a better land that's flowing with milk and honey. He'll be introduced that phrase later. To a better family that is supposed to be characterized by loving commitment to each other. That's why we are, the Torah is summed up in those two commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So and Yeshua says, everyone will know that you are my disciples because you love one another. So he's bringing them to a land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. He's bringing him to a family of people that will be characterized by loving one another, hopefully. It hasn't always been that way, but ultimately that's what it will be. And then he is himself going to become our father. He will be his father. He will replace his father Terah in the land of Haran, and he will become his father, his heavenly father, who is faithfully going to provide for all of his needs and brings us a tremendous blessing. The Father, the best Father of all, who sees all and knows all and can guide us through this minefield of life in complete safety. It is when we do not listen to his voice, but we get off of the path, that we bring pain and trial and misery upon ourselves. And this too serves a purpose, and that is to bring us back to the path that God is trying to get us to walk towards. So those were my thoughts about this counterbalance of leave this stuff, get this stuff. So I think that's a good thing that we can remember, is leave what lies behind and look forward to what lies ahead, just like Paul says. Now we can read verses 2 and 3 a little bit more carefully and look at each segment of these promised blessings and this promised kingdom type language that is being talked about here. So this preaching of the gospel is this: he will turn Israel into a great nation. He will turn Abraham. I will make of you a great nation. That's the first part. Now, was Israel ever a great nation? And what does it mean, great? Great in what way? Great in numbers? He certainly does seem to reiterate that over and over. Sand of the sea, grains on the beach, stars in the sky, that type of language that talks about numbers of descendants. Has Israel been a great nation in that regard? Well, if you kind of have the traditional church theology of there are Jews and then there are Gentiles, then this promise of God would never come true, frankly, right? I mean, how many Jews are there in the world? 14 million? That's a drop in the bucket. There's only 7 million Jews in the whole land of Israel, and by their own calculations, there's maybe another 7 million here in America. So we have just about as equal number of Jews here in America as they have in the land of Israel. And then there's a smattering of them scattered in all the other nations where they're not terribly welcome and they're leaving there in droves. So we're talking about maybe 14 million Jews. Maybe 16 if you want to stretch those numbers. That is a small, tiny fragment, a very small percentage of the population of this planet. Is that a great nation? Not really. No, it's a very, very minute minority. However, if you have a more biblical-oriented view towards who is the body of Messiah, who is the family of God, then you're going to need to include the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You're going to need to include the church in your thinking, and say, okay, wait a minute. Now, if you consider the people of God and the family of Abraham as the Jews and all of these people who have converted and turned to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that becomes a much bigger nation. Now, I'm not regarding who these people are and what their beliefs are and how close they are to this God. I don't know. But there's a whole lot of them who are claiming him, who are claiming to be sons of Abraham. So in that sense, yeah, it's a big group of people. How many Christians are there in the world, plus Jews? 1 billion? 2 billion? You've even got the Muslims who claim descendancy from Abraham.
It's also, the word can also be important, right?
Oh, great is important. Yes, absolutely.
And even though they're a drop in the bucket, everyone knows who they are.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you could not possibly misconstrue the importance and the significance that the scriptures in our Bible have had on the world, frankly. You can look at the history of the world before Christianity and the history of the world after Christianity. Now, it was brutal and nasty and short, during the Middle Ages, but is it just me, or I have always looked at Western civilization? I don't say that this is true in regards to weird, backwards places that don't value freedom, but, the Protestant ethic, the Judeo-Christian values, I really think that the scriptures have had a profound impact on the world in the way that people view the world. Now, that's unfortunately changing quite a bit, but for a long time it was that way. Keith, I apologize.
Well, that word for great, gadol, it also has a definition in the Strong, older, elder. So it is they are one of the oldest nations.
Yes.
Established with the best written history.
Sure.
Showing their lineage, so there is all those truths that are following them, where some of these other nations, their neighbors, struggle to find all those truths.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of the people that were around in these days, where are the Babylonians? Where are the Chaldeans? Where are the Assyrians? The Egyptians? Did you know that by the count of many geopolitical scientists, the people who are residing in Egypt today are not actually Egyptians? That the migration of peoples has changed that, and that the people who were referred to as Egyptians from Bible times are not the same group of people who are living in Egypt today. That the Muslim conquests completely changed that. I don't know. I mean, you look at what nation has survived, all the way down from the earliest antiquity. It's Abraham and his family in various forms. What's that?
Against all odds.
Absolutely against all odds. And what are the odds that this little group of people, that he's the smallest of all nations, a fraction, a minority of people, would maintain their heritage and their teachings and their scriptures and their way of life for thousands of years, where civilizations have risen and crumbled and risen and crumbled and risen and crumbled, and here's this group of people that's been doing the same thing, reading the same book, doing the same stuff for thousands of years. That's a good testament to these promises that God spoke. Gracie?
Purely human and earthly, physical way, they have been leaders in science and medicine and all kinds of things that they are behind none in their ability to do these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And financially.
You're absolutely right. I think, if you look at Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel Prize winners in science, technology, it is inordinately weighted towards the Jewish people for whatever reason. You can get into some weird conspiracy stuff with the Elders of Zion and stuff, but they control a good portion of the wealth in the world. They have won a lot of awards for science and literature and technology and advancement. I mean, that little nation of Israel now is pumping out more technology. A lot of the most advanced technology that we have in America was actually developed there. Just the gifts that they have been provided by God and handed down to the world has been tremendous. The Messiah, least of all, not least of all, but most importantly of all. But yeah, their contribution to the world has been great. They have been a blessing to the world, and we have, the Christian people have as well. I don't want to minimize that and say, oh, these Jews, but the Christian men and women throughout time have made huge contributions to advancing civilization and getting men to love one another and trying to be helpful and charitable and loving, spreading the gospel to all parts of the world. So that's been in that way, the nation is great. In that way, the nation is absolutely great. Now, part B is he says, I will bless you. Now, we've just kind of spoken about that, that God has indeed blessed the children of Israel. Whether you're talking Jews or Christians, they're all children of Israel. And they have been a tremendous blessing, and they have blessed the world themselves by their contributions. So that we can check that off and say, yes, that's absolutely true. Make your name great. The name of Abraham, as far as I know, is pretty much universally known. I mean, whether you're talking about the world's 3 major religions, all would trace their lineage and their faith back to Abraham. Abraham is a great and towering figure in the history of the world. He's also a great and towering figure in the history of our own scriptures. He is mentioned here first in the Torah. He is mentioned repeatedly in the prophets. I mean, God identifies himself by this guy's name repeatedly. It says, I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Jacob. I am the God of Israel, Isaac and Jacob. So God identifies himself by using this guy's name. Abraham is mentioned so many times in the New Testament as like the model of what it means to have faith, the faith of Abraham. So, I mean, yes, he has blessed him and he has made his name great. That is true. And go ahead.
I was just going to say the word great there is slightly different than the other great.
Is that koved or kavod?
They're both gadol, but one is spelled slightly differently. And in the BDB, it talks about to make powerful or praise or magnify, which kind of relates to what you were saying about, his name being part of the God of Abraham.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is that you can see that God and this man Abraham are so intricately linked. Remember 2 things. We talked about Noah and Enoch walking with God, but Abraham walks before God. And we talked about that and what the significance of that was. And then we also talked about, we haven't yet talked about, how Abram is going to have his name changed. And that God will take one of his own letters of his own name and add it to Abraham's name and make him Abraham instead of Abram. Do you know what the difference is in the meanings of those 2 names? What does Abram mean? Anybody? Abram means the father of many. Avram, the father of many. Avraham means the father of many nations. So by adding the letter Hey, the rabbis have explained it as God took a letter from his own name and added it to Abraham's name, and he became not just a father of many, but a father of many nations, which we know that Abraham is the father of many nations when you consider it, how the children of Israel, the 12 tribes, became different people groups around the world, and that people attach themselves to the name of Abraham are all over the world. Remember that Abram's grandsons, children, Israel
Sorry, there's
remember that
a spider.
Jacob's son Ephraim, his name means fullness of the nations. He will become many nations. That Manasseh himself would become a great nation. Many people groups have come from Abraham. So yeah, he became not. And it's kind of ironic too, because he's called the father of many when he's almost 100 years old and has no children, and yet he's called the father of many. And then he kind of, to expand that irony, he says you become the father of many nations instead of just the father of many, even though he has no children at all. And Sarai is barren. So this is seems like a hopeless situation, but we obviously know the story that it doesn't end that way. So he is a blessing. Now, this is a huge one. Bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly? What do you think that means?
Before we hit that part,
Please.
is there one other little sentence there, or did I miss something? Bless your name.
Make your name great.
and
You shall be a blessing.
You will be a blessing.
Yeah.
So that you will be. Angie, is Angie back there again?
Angela?
That's all right. That you will be.
Haya something?
Yeah. So it's more like become a blessing. Like the word used not there, but like he himself will become a blessing.
How would you interpret that?
Well, I think that's kind of like the indicator of like once we are blessed, it's our obligation to bless others.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like part of that walk.
Absolutely. And I have heard probably from a few different people that the blessings that God gives should be characterized like this: that you are not a vessel to store God's blessings. You are a pipe through whom God's blessings are supposed to flow.
Yep.
You are not supposed to gather blessings and hold on to them. You are supposed to be a conduit. That God passes his blessings to you and you bless others around you.
It's just like you read the word, you learn about God, and God and his word comes through you out to other people, and not just.
And that should be true with everything. If God provides you material blessings with money and you have enough to be able to help someone in need, pass that blessing on. If you are knowledgeable about the word, then pass that blessing on.
Give out what you have in your own
Exactly.
heart.
Yeah.
Hang on to it and you lose it.
That's very true. I think that's a very real scriptural principle, is that the more you try to hold on to something, the more it hurts when he takes it away from you, because he will take it away from you. That he intends for you to pass
Faster
on
you
the
give it
blessing.
away, the easier it is to not hang on to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need this.
You can look at that in so many ways. Hands that are already full cannot be blessed with fullness. It's easier to steer a car that's moving. These kind of metaphors that us Christian people have come up with to discuss these spiritual principles are very helpful, I think, to understand.
Like God gives you money, and he goes, "No, listen, I gave this to you, but not for you to keep. I want you to give this out to somebody else." And you're going.
But yeah, no, we can do that very much.
Quickly.
So thank you, Mike, for bringing that up. That was a great point. And now moving forward just a little bit, to talking about this, I will bless those who bless, and those who curse, I will curse. How would you interpret that, historically, in relation to peoples of the world interacting with the people of God, and to yourself, people of the world interacting with you? Would you see that differently? Or would you apply that principle to yourself? That do you believe that God will bless those who bless you, and that those who curse you will be cursed?
Yeah, God watches over you.
I believe personally that is absolutely true. That you, as a descendant of Abraham, you receive these promises.
Yeah.
Is he going to take you to this land flowing with milk and honey? Yeah, we certainly, that's our anticipation. We're going to the kingdom, right? Remember, the kingdom is not in heaven. The kingdom is here, in that land. That's where the kingdom is going to be. Yeah, you might be in heaven for a little while in the interim. If you die and your spirit goes to be with God until he comes and establishes his kingdom, yeah, you might have a temporary stay in heaven. But your destiny is to be here, on this planet, in a body like Yeshua had, living in that land. So that is your land. That is your land by birthright. Okay? And the one who blesses you will be blessed. You believe that?
Yeah, definitely.
The one who curses you will be cursed? I believe that is definitely proven out in the scriptures.
We may not see it right offhand real quick, but
That's true. And I think that is something that we need to take the attitude of King David. Because King David had the most amazing attitude in regard to, for example, when he was being persecuted by Saul. Remember how many opportunities he had to get his revenge on Saul? And he said, "Far be it from me to touch the Lord's anointed." He knew God made him the king. I know that God has made me the king, but I ain't killing that guy. I'm not. It's not going to be my hand that kills him. That's God's job. The fact that he's persecuting me, I'm sure that tore him up in his spirit. And you know that a lot of those Psalms, he was calling out to God saying, "Man, my enemies are surrounding me, and I'm surrounded by dogs, and they want to kill me, and they breathe out lies against me." You can see him crying out to God a lot because of the persecution that he was going through. But he never reached out his hand to do damage to the people that he knew that God was working through.
Yeah.
It was not his place. And we need to have that same attitude with somebody who curses us or mistreats us. It's like, does a servant seek for his own justice? No, he does not. He trusts in his master to get him justice. You know, that leave room for me. Justice, recompense is mine, saith the Lord,
A couple of things. I think on the piece about the blessings, we can tie this back into the previous verse that we just discussed, that when we become blessed, it's for us to bless others. So
Yeah.
obviously those around us that are blessing us
Right.
will be blessed by us.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that's the way that this is supposed to work.
Right, absolutely.
Walking this way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That those blessings that he gives us will flow through us to others. And I think we also need to remember the Torah is filled with both spiritual and temporal blessings. That there are blessings in the Torah that have to do with, so many of them are dealing with, if you will follow these instructions, you will never want for anything. I will have all of your crops grow. You will be bearing lots of children. He's speaking in terms of physical, tangible, material blessings. Now, I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel to you here. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you believe the promises of God and you believe his word to be true, he says, if you will follow these instructions of mine, I will give you this and give you that and give you that your crops will grow, and I won't put the diseases upon you that I put upon the Egyptians, and you'll have plenty of children, and you'll reign on your land. These are all material blessings. Now, of course, we know to look at that in a deeper spiritual sense and to see the spiritual blessings that are couched in the language of the material blessings. But I think many times we can lose sight of that God does promise to take care of all of your material needs. Yeshua reiterated this several times in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. Paul reiterates this again. Why do you worry about clothing and food and shelter? Why would you even concern yourself with those things? God knows you need those things before you even ask him. You seek his kingdom, and all of those things are just added as a side benefit. That's been a really challenging one for me to really internalize. Because Because I can get myself wrapped around the axle many times thinking, how am I going to meet my needs? How are these needs going to be met? How am I going to make this payment? How am I going to make enough money for this? How am I going to do that? I am still learning that that is an absolute and tremendous waste of my time, and it's also an exhibition of my lack of faith. It's also a slap in the face of my God, who I technically do not believe him, when he said, why do you concern yourself with these things? Trust me, I have everything that you need covered. You don't worry about that. You just do what I put in front of you. Whatever the job is, the task is, the person is that you need to help, the job that I've given you to do, whether you're a plumber or an electrician or this guy or that guy, it doesn't matter. You just do what I have put in front of you. I will take care of everything else. Whatever I've put in front of you, do it, and do it as though you're doing it unto me. Everything else is cake.
Yeah, I always say, if when you give, if it really doesn't hurt you to give, are you really giving?
That's a really common teaching among the Jewish sages regarding a sacrifice. Like when King David said he needed to stop this plague that had started because he had decided to number the people of Israel, and he got a word, maybe I should go up to Jerusalem and build an altar and sacrifice to Jehovah. And he went and met with Ornan the Jebusite, and of course he says, hey man, I need to buy your threshing floor so I can offer sacrifices to God. And Ornan's like, take it, dude. It's all yours. He says, no, I'm not going to offer to God something that costs me nothing. I will pay you for your land and for your implements that we're going to use for the wood and for your oxen that you're threshing with, or that you're farming with. I'm not going to offer to God something that costs me nothing. That's not a sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's true, very true. So I just think, we need to take very seriously that we are to be a blessing to others, that he will indeed bless those who bless us. I think you can see this so clearly in the life of Joseph, for example, that he became a tremendous blessing to the house of Potiphar. That everything that this dude touched just turned to gold, everything that he had his hand in. It happened to Jacob when he took over his uncle Laban's flocks, that God caused the flocks to just flourish and grow, and he became tremendously. Now Laban was a fool and tried to cheat Jacob, and so God took all of Laban's wealth and gave it to Jacob. But technically, he did bless the one who he had been blessing. We can see so many examples of this. Abraham became incredibly wealthy. Isaac was incredibly wealthy. Jacob was incredibly wealthy. And they became a blessing to the people around them.
Doesn't tell us anything about what happened to Ishmael, does it?
Well, it actually does say when Abraham was told, when Sarai said, get him rid of him, he was upset. And he said, that Ishmael might stand before you. And he says, no, your son Isaac. My name will be called in him. But I will bless Ishmael and make him a great nation. 12 princes. He says, he is your offspring. And I think, frankly, that, and we'll look at this more deeply as we get there, that this is the case with Lot. And I think I've mentioned to you a couple of times that the New Testament scriptures talk so much about righteous Lot. But when we look at the life of Lot, we don't see righteousness. We don't see him making many good decisions. We don't see him making faithful decisions that really characterize him as following God. And yet, Peter 3 times, Paul 1 time or 2 times, the author of Hebrews at least 2 or 3 times, says righteous Lot. That righteous man's soul was troubled by what he saw in Sodom. And that certainly could be true, but the Torah doesn't say that. It's kind of a mystery. But I think he was blessed, and he was given a blessing because of his relationship to Abraham.
Yeah.
And you know what? That actually encourages me, in a way, that the New Testament scriptures would call Lot righteous, because many times I feel like Lot myself. That fills me with a little bit of encouragement, thinking, maybe where Lot just had maybe his soul was a little bit troubled by what was going on. I mean, clearly you can see from the scriptures, he's like, hey man, to these two angels, you don't want to be camping out in this square. That is not safe. These people are, let me take you into my house. So yeah, I can see that he did exhibit some concern for these people of God who were visiting his sinful city. But then, it does fill me with some hope that if the Bible considers Lot to be a righteous man, then maybe he'll consider me to be a righteous
Well, he
man.
considered David a man after God's own heart. But look at David. He was a murderer and adulterer and
He made some serious
really
errors.
poor excuse for a father. And
That really, these stories really do encourage me quite a bit to
I mean,
look
it
at.
doesn't mean it's okay for us to say, well, he did it and he got away
No,
with it.
yeah, we
No.
certainly can't use it as an
He didn't
excuse. But I mean, we look at Abraham, the father of our faith, and we can see a huge mistake that he made right here. Haven't even gotten to that yet.
You'll see mistakes in every person in the Bible.
Oh yes,
But
absolutely.
righteousness means
There
right
is
standing with God.
there. Do you know how many people there are in the Bible that the Bible has absolutely nothing negative to say about them? Enoch is one. Not Elijah. No, not quite. Anybody else you can think of?
Noah.
Jesus.
That one's questionable. Jesus for sure. Yeah. Joseph. The Bible doesn't say anything negative about Joseph.
Except when he was stealing from his brother, wasn't that Joseph?
No, he didn't steal anything from anyone.
I mean, the birthright.
No, that was Jacob.
Okay, all right. I get those two mixed up.
And then there's Job.
Joel.
Does it Job?
Joel.
It says that they didn't sin with his mouth.
True.
How about Peter when Christ rebuked him?
That was tough.
Well, he did.
Get behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, it's an interesting question that you have there, but I think that, it's such a contrast with what came just before that, oh, blessed are you, Peter, the Spirit of God has spoken through you, get behind me, Satan. That was quite a contrast. And I think it really contrasts the Spirit of God moving through Peter and him speaking the truth and saying, you are the Son of the living God. And him saying, wait, you're saying you're going to die? That's not what my understanding of the Messiah is all about. The Messiah comes and rules and destroys all his enemies, and far be it from you. That will never happen. And then he's like, get behind me, Satan, because what does Satan want? His own way.
Yeah.
What did Peter want? His own perception of how the Messiah was supposed to operate was taken, the foreground to what the actual program was. So I don't think that Peter was infested by the devil at that moment or something. I just think that he began to think in human terms of what do I want, and that's what the devil does. He thinks about himself first. So yeah, blessings and curses. We have a tremendous series of blessings here that are just so powerful. And then this last one, that all families or clans of the earth shall be blessed by you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. This is certainly true, especially in the New Testament, the Greek Scripture era, where the gospel of the kingdom is preached to all nations, and it's just a free for all to open it up to anybody among the nations who wants to come and join the family of Abraham. There is the fulfillment of that promise and that prophecy right there. All the families of the earth will be blessed by you. Any comments or questions or concerns regarding this series of things? Yes, Mike.
Did you have any thoughts about the two words for curses? Like the blessing words are the same, but the curse words are different.
Tell us a little bit about those two words. Curse him who curses you. Tell us a little bit. What do you have there?
So the cursing then is the way we would think of that as a curse being on that person. But he would curse that person for making light of you, not necessarily for someone else cursing you, but somebody dishonoring you. And I think that that's kind of key to understanding the last part of this chapter.
Good insight.
And the curses that happen to Pharaoh
Right.
because of his dishonor to Abraham. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but I'm kind of wondering if Abraham's semi-deception here to Pharaoh is putting God's word to a test, saying he knows that they're going to attempt to dishonor them, and he's going to trust God to curse those people. He came out with a blessing for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point, and we'll definitely discuss that when we come to that part. Angela, did you want to say something in that regard?
Yeah, about those two words. We covered that when we went through Matthew. I don't remember why, but there was a point in there where we addressed the differences between the curse, and one of them was, it was when the curse your mother and father thing that, remember when we talked about cursing your mother and father, and that was almost to like take them lightly, that word for curse.
Oh, yes,
But then the other word for curse was like the hammer of God.
Right.
And that he was saying here, if someone even takes you lightly, I will rip their face off, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the two.
Yeah.
Contrast.
Yeah, I do remember that now when we were talking about that in the book of Matthew and saying and that was what I think it was when he was talking to the Pharisees about honoring their father and mother, and you say anything that you would have gained by me is Corban, that this was like showing little regard, discounting, and this was related to children honoring father and mother. And that kind of freaked me out when we looked at that. The meaning behind that is like anyone who doesn't take father and mother seriously enough is under that curse. That's a serious business. And I mean, and you unfortunately, you don't need to imagine it, but the way that the people of God are treated in the world today, with absolute disdain and hatred and no respect at all. Can you begin to understand why the judgment of God is coming upon the world and how angry he might be for? I mean, how would it make you? How has it? Maybe hopefully it hasn't happened to you, but when someone dishonors your child, when someone does wrong to your child, I mean, when somebody rips off Stefan and takes his money, I mean, you'd like to go and rip their face off and take away all of their money, make them lose their real estate license, go to jail. Someone dishonors your children. You can dishonor me. That's one thing. You dishonor my wife. That's something different. You dishonor my children who are young and vulnerable. My wife is pretty tough. Yes, I will be very angry if you dishonor my wife, but she's pretty tough. You dishonor my children, that's when things get serious. And I think that God views his children in the same way. You cannot dishonor his children and get away with it, unfortunately.
It says if you dishonor them, you're really dishonoring God if you dishonor the Christians.
I agree, absolutely. So, I don't know what time it is here. It is time, isn't it? I apologize, folks. It's been a great discussion. I know we haven't gotten very far. And before we wrap up, there's so much more that we're going to discuss here. But I wanted to just briefly show you a couple of maps of the Holy Land. Maybe some questions and ideas that maybe we haven't thought about too much. This is just a little map of the journey of Abraham and his family. They originally left Kasdim, which means city of the Chaldeans. This is Kasdim, down in Babylonia, Mesopotamia, what is now modern Iraq. His family, and if you read the book of Jasher or the book of Jubilees, you can read this narrative regarding why his family left Babylon and traveled up to Haran. It says that they were going to the land of Canaan. Now, some people have interpreted that to say, well, they didn't exactly make it to the land of Canaan. They only made it to here. But technically, you read the instructions of who are these inhabitants and what is the land of Canaan, that is technically the land of Canaan. So his family did move to the land of Canaan. However, bless you, when we look at what's going on in later scriptures, we think of the land of Canaan as just this area here that eventually will become the state of Israel.
Well, doesn't it say in the chapter we read that they left Haran and went into Canaan?
Yeah, there is something about that, and I think that, yeah, there are possibly two different locations there. Does seem to be some conflict in the text there about whether there are two different places called Haran, or maybe that's just not translated very well. But you are right, that something is a little wonky there. But apparently, Abraham and his family left to here, and they lived there for a little while, and this is when God said, leave your father, leave your land, and leave that stuff. And then he left and came down into here. He went to Egypt and then came back. So this is a little map showing the journey of Abraham. And then this next map is what you might find, and frankly, this was kind of hard for me to find, and you can look up what is the promised land. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll see just this little sliver right here, which is the modern state of Israel. That is not the promised land. That I know for a fact. But it is difficult to find some maps where people have actually looked at the scripture, because Abraham is given a description of this land. It says from the river Egypt to the Euphrates and from the great sea. Okay, so it's giving you some borders. And a lot of times when you say, what is the biblical promised land, and you look that up in Google or something, you're going to see a bunch of maps which show this little section right here. Just that little section. But something that occurred to me is from the brook in Egypt, from the river of Egypt. That's the Nile River, right? Well, does that mean that the land of Israel just goes to where the Nile River flows right here? Because if you think about it, the Nile River flows all the way from Sudan and way up into Ethiopia. The Nile River starts here and goes all the way through Western Africa and ends up in the ocean there. So is all of this part of the land of Israel? I think it is. Huh?
It says wherever they're in the Exodus, wherever their foot touches.
That's right.
And we've learned a lot about their truck through Saudi Arabia.
That's right. They have their footprints. I think we watched in that documentary, they found the footprints of these Israelites all over in this area. Jerry?
Isn't there somewhere where God told Abraham to go for a long walk?
Yes, he said
And
walk the
whatever
length and
land
breadth.
you walk around is the promised land.
That's
Whether
right.
that was Saudi Arabia.
It doesn't tell us
was
where he
gone for
went.
a long time. He
Yeah.
had plenty of time to walk around
Yeah.
it.
It doesn't tell us exactly where he went, but he said walk the length and the breadth of the land, and every place that the sole of your foot touches will be yours.
Whatever that was.
Right, right. So now some people have suggested this is actually probably more what the promised land is, because there's the one river, the Euphrates, and that runs all the way up from in the highlands of Turkey, all the way to the sea, the Gulf of Aqaba. Or no, is that
Persian Gulf.
the Persian Gulf? Excuse me. And then the river Egypt. Why would you just stop right there where it meets Egypt? Why wouldn't you talk about the whole length of the river?
Well, at that time, that was all Egypt. You had Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt.
That is true.
It's just changed names now.
Yeah, that is true. Now I looked at this and I thought, okay, wait a minute. What is something is even taking this land mass, something still seems to be missing, because it says that he was going to give them the land of the Hittites. Now the Hittites,
That's up in Turkey.
that's in Turkey.
Yeah. Well, I think Turkey's like the head of this
It's,
location, right?
I kind of think so too.
I don't know if it's true, but it kind of seems like the description, that's where the garden seems to have been.
I
That's
believe
where
that
the
that's
ark
possible.
rested. This
Yeah.
is where the 7 churches.
The head of the rivers seem to flow out of this area.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something definitely going on there. Now, I don't want to say this definitively, but it seems to me from the biblical description that the Hittites at one time did inhabit this area of northern Syria, and it is perhaps true that as the Israelites expanded, that the Hittites were pushed into Turkey. But I mean, that's where you see all of the grand monuments, and the Hittite Empire, the remnants of the Hittite Empire are in Turkey. And so when the Hittites, you're taking away the land of the Hittites, that's all the way up into Turkey. Jerry?
Wasn't the Hittites, in Egypt, kind of in power at the same time? Only one,
Yeah.
they were up here, they were down here. I don't know which one was stronger, but they were both pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. There were, in the ancient historical annals, you really have Egypt probably coming first in prominence, and then these ancient city-states of Mesopotamia, and then the Hittites, and it does seem that, power would rise here, and then it would rise up here in the Assyrian Empire, and it would definitely rise up here. So these are the main world powers: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, the Hittites. Those are some pretty big empires. At least those are like the most ancient ones.
Back in those days.
Yeah, back in those days.
Persia.
Persia?
Persia is a little more east.
Yeah, this would be in Iran.
Yeah.
So Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire would have been over here at this time. So I just wanted you to kind of get a visual picture of what is the Promised Land. It is certainly not this little tiny finger of land right here that the state of Israel is currently occupying. That is a fraction of the land that was promised to Abraham and his descendants. And frankly, this is where you're going to reside someday. Now, I personally think that you can see in the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel talking so many scriptures about waters in the desert and trees growing up in the desert and streams in the wilderness, that all of this land that is practically uninhabitable, solid wasteland and desert, will be completely different in the kingdom. That this will be like the garden of God. Whereas now it's a barren, blasted desert which nobody can cross.
Well, the latitude we live at right here is about the same latitude that is.
Yeah.
Look what we've done with this desert.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean-
Absolutely. Angela?
I think what God could do to it.
No kidding.
Israel has done that with what they've been given.
That's-
If you look at
yeah.
Google
Mm-hmm.
Earth, you can see
That's
where
green.
the Palestinians, it turns from green to brown right along that line
Mm-hmm.
because they have learned how to grow stuff.
Yeah, the Israelis rather have invented technologies for watering arid, dry lands that are actually being imported all over the world, even here in America. Some guy in Israel invented a little drip head like you have in your yard that waters your plants. It is a self-cleaning, self-regulating drip head that they invented in Israel and is used to water and irrigate all these crops. So they're exporting that technology all over the world to turn barren desert into green places where things grow. And you, like Angela said, you can definitely see that. If you zoom in on Google Maps, everywhere that the Jews are and have control is lush and green and things are growing. And just outside of that, where they don't have complete control, it's dead and lifeless and there's nothing growing. That land is flourishing under their hand because of the blessing of God that we discussed. It's interesting stuff. So that's all I have for this evening. I know we've run out of time and there's so much more to cover, and we will cover next time, but there's just so much cool, awesome stuff here for us to learn and apply to our lives. But thank you for your time and attention and your excellent questions and commentary. Let us pray and we'll wrap up.